Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming today and for your service. I want to talk about housing for persons with disabilities. The chairman, myself, we had a hearing here about this issue. One of his colleagues from Connecticut came and talked about it. Pretty dramatic need. And your budget allocates just $90 million to housing for persons with disability. That's a decrease of 70% from the 2010 appropriations, which were $300 million. So it just seems to me that the cut strikes me as very bad, particularly for the most vulnerable people in our society, who already should be at the top of the list in terms of who should have access to housing. They already face enormous challenges. We have 1.3 million low-income disabled households that have to spend more than half of their limited income on rent. And so, the cut is, at the end of the day, I don't quite understand how you justify it. Now, I know you'll probably tell me that the programs weren't working. The problem is that a cut isn't a reform. It's a cut. If you reform the program and you use the money under a new reformed program, that's different. But a cut is a cut, and I don't know how that necessarily moves to reform.
So thank you for the question. This was one of probably the most difficult choice that we made in the budget. And ultimately, as I said earlier, we decided to focus resources on existing units, and there were cuts on capital in many different areas. We made a commitment to renew every one of the existing 811 units that are there, the disabled units, but there's no doubt that this will have a negative impact. Two things I would say about it. First of all, if you look broadly at the budget and affordable housing, the vast majority of housing for people with disabilities is not produced by this program. If the tax credit produces more than 10 times the number of units for people with disabilities, the number of vouchers, public housing units that serve people with disabilities vastly outweigh the number of units that are produced by 811. Not to say that those units aren't important, but I want to be clear that we will still produce and provide a substantial amount of housing for people with disabilities. The second thing I would say is that given the difficulties with the program, the period of time and the complexity of producing those units today, we've gotten to the point, and I have this experience directly myself prior to coming to HUD, of trying to produce these units. The complexity of them, the low level of funding per unit in the program requires raising all kinds of other capital, tax credits, a range of other things, and yet the rules are still set up as if the program was a 100% funding program. We felt that given all of those difficulties and complexities, as hard a choice as it was, that not continuing to fund the units under the way the program currently operates was the decision that we would go forward with in the budget. I recognize that that's hard, but I do want to make clear that we are committed to funding the program when we can get reforms that actually will make it as effective as possible.
Well, we have a difference of opinion in terms of reform and then, having the resources. Once you cut the resources, reform doesn't really ultimately solve the problem, because then you don't have the resources to implement that reform. And even leaving $90 million in the section is, at the end of the day, I don't know what the purpose is if you don't believe the program is worthy of spending any money based upon the way it operates. I heard what you had to say as it relates to that other programs that we have ultimately provide housing with disabilities, but clearly this one, which was focused on the question of providing housing for people with disabilities, is a driver. The other ones produce some housing for people with disability, but is not dedicated to them, right?
In fact, much of the housing, whether it's tax credits or others, there are lots and lots of projects that are dedicated to people with disabilities as well. So those aren't just mixed projects. that happen to go to people with disabilities. There are many, many units that are targeted as well.
Can you provide to me and the committee, under all of your other existing projects, what it is that gets produced for people with disabilities against what it is that you have overall produced for different forms of housing?
Yep.
So that we can make a determination. You know, Senator Johans and I, working with the chairman, have developed legislation to reform 811 and to leverage other affordable housing resources, streamline the application process, accelerate development, build additional units with the same appropriation. Have you looked at that? Is that something that...
We have, and we think that legislation, as well as companion in the House, is a good start towards that. We've had some discussions with the committee, as well as on the House side, about suggested changes that we would have, and we hope that we could get that legislation passed as quickly as possible.
With reference to housing for the elderly, you also have a large cut, a decrease of 67%. There are now an estimated 10 seniors for every Section 202 unit that becomes available. What's the story there?
The 202 program and the 811 program operate very similarly and have the same fundamental issues. And so again, we looked at broadly the number of units that are produced, how quickly and effectively additional capital for 202 or 811 would produce units relative to the other programs, and decided, again, in a year of very difficult choices, that it made sense to try to make the program work more effectively before investing further capital in those.
I'm just trying to understand how 60–70% cuts mean more housing for people with disabled and elderly. I don't get it. It doesn't add up for me as simple math, but then again, that wasn't my strongest forte.
Well, as you just suggested, let us get you the numbers of whether it's increased funding in vouchers, in these range of the new tax credits that will be funded, how all of those produce units. Let me be clear. I'm not arguing that this is a good thing for seniors or people with disabilities. These were difficult choices. Had we not had the budget pressure that we had, I would have made different choices. But this was a prioritization that we needed to do given the broader fiscal circumstances, and we felt, given the way that the program's currently operated, in this kind of budget pressure. And I want to be very clear again that this does not mean long-term we're not committed to a 202 or an 811 program that can produce units in an effective manner.
Let me ask you finally, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I've heard you respond to the foreclosure modification issues, and it just, I look at the numbers, 168,000 homeowners who have received final 5-year loan modifications under the administration's plan. It's a tiny fraction of 6 million people who are more than 60 days late on their loans. You know, we've gone through various iterations here. What makes us believe that, what have we learned to try to do this better and provide a greater solution at the end of the day? Understanding not everybody is going to be able to be saved, and I fully understand that. But 168,000 out of 6 million, I don't know that that's success.
So before you arrived, we talked about some of these numbers more specifically. We did release new numbers yesterday, an increase of over 60,000 permanent modifications last month. So the pace of permanent modifications has accelerated. An additional more than 100,000 that have been completed and are only awaiting signature from the homeowner. So in total there, you've got over 330,000. And so we are making substantial progress. Just to be clear, and this often, I think, the numbers in terms of delinquent loans compared to modifications, the vast majority of those loans that are delinquent will not end up going to foreclosure. Right now, the pace of our permanent modifications is almost equal to the number of actual foreclosures that are happening each month. So I do believe we are having an impact on the problem at a significant scale. Did it take us too long to get there? Yes. Are there further changes that we continue to make and to push? Yes. Has the problem changed and we need new tools? That's why we announced some changes a few weeks ago. But this is it's an enormously difficult problem. Many of these homeowners, had we acted earlier, I think, and begun to get these systems in place years ago, we would have been able to reach more of them earlier. But we still will not, even with our programs, not be able to reach everyone. There are some folks who simply cannot afford the homes they're in, even with lower prices and a modification. And we have many of these homes are investor owners or second homes or others, and we'd be happy to share the details. A large fraction of those are not eligible for the program for reasons that we decided. So in total, our estimate is that of the roughly 5.4 million people that we would expect over the 3 years to be at real risk of foreclosure, not the 6 million today, but over time, our program is targeted to reach about 2 million of those that are eligible, that are owner-occupants, that have modestly priced homes, that aren't the other ones that are would be excluded. So we're reaching a very large fraction with the more than 1.1 million modifications we've done to date, trial modifications. We're reaching a very large portion of that overall
Thank you, Mr.
group.
Secretary.